Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Michelle, Peter, Mervyn, Caroline, Powell, Rachel, and everyone else that are joining us. And a good Chodesh to you all as we begin and usher in the new month, the month of Shabbat. It should be a better month, please God, for us all. So today's learning is dedicated in the memory of Zalman ben Rev Wolf Levine, Leah Bas John Davis, Mordechai ben Yaakov Baruch Fisher, Aaron ben Chaim Eliezer Goodman, Rivka Bas Shimon King, Yitta Bas Chaim Pushko Aronovich, Rizel Bas Chaim Eliyahu K, Sivia Bas Yaakov Scheingold. We're going to also do for tomorrow, because we don't have, Chava Bas Yaakov Conway, Yehudis Miriam Bas Yeshua Zeleg Ber, Moshe Ber ben Yehuda Eliezer Lewis. Bear with me. Sarah Bas Yehuda Denton, Miriam Bas Nosson Fox, Sarah Rachel Bas Toby Kleinman, Aaron Herschel ben Beryl Goldberg, Bela Bas Ruben Stewart, Rivka Bas Shmuel Phillips, Binyamin ben Yitzchak Raven, Moshe ben Tzvi Yehuda Simon, and Tamara Bas Bible Slavin, Chaim ben Moshe Berman, Gedalia ben Shlomo Brazil, Avram ben Yosef Cohen Mati, Lily Bas Sora Ferry, Devorah Bas Moshe Saider, Chana Bas Shlomo Grossman, Rafael ben Shmuel King, Rafael David ben Cohen Rosenberg. I think we've gone way over. And let me just also include the names of those which we are in the year for. Leah Bas Bible, Harav Yaakov, Tzvi ben David Aryeh Sak, Sivia Bas Mordechai, Avram ben David Slavin, Sivora Bekel Rosh Baruch, Shalom ben Eli, Beina Bas Bible, Chuma Shoshana Bas Yaakov Shmuel, Kayla Bela Bas Henech, Yom Yoachir ben Moshe Eliezer, Sarah Malka Bas ben Yomin. Okay, I hope that you are able to hear me. Can you hear me? Just to confirm, because I'm using headphones for hopefully better quality. Yes, can you hear me? Anyone before we start? So yesterday we were discussing the second part of our path to God through the land of Israel. And we spoke about the inextricable bond and connection between the Jewish people and the Jewish people and the land of Israel. And in fact, we find that Abraham was commanded to traverse the land. He walked the length and breadth of the land, and that was a forerunner to the conquest of the land of Israel. Now, why is it's so important for us to have the land of Israel? What exactly does it mean? We mentioned yesterday there are many other places in the Middle East which are far more fertile, with far better natural resources. So what is it that is meant to draw us to the land of Israel in particular and made it the promised land? And the answer is, it's not so much because of the physical beauty or the physical resources, but it is because of the spiritual opportunity, the opportunity which Abraham was told, Lech lecha, to go to yourself. In other words, the greatest opportunity for us to connect to our essence, to be able to fulfill our potential in a spiritual personal growth capacity is in the land of Israel, because there are greater opportunities in the land of Israel. It is only one of only two mitzvot which we can do with the whole of our being, the whole of our bodies. The other mitzvah is sukkah and living in the land of Israel. When you step off the plane and you stand on the tarmac in Ben Gurion, your whole body from head to toe is in the land of Israel. And I think we're all touched and moved by recently when what's his name? He came to Israel. You remind me, the ex-spy. Sorry, I've gone blank. And when he came down the steps from Ben Gurion Airport, and he came and met Benjamin Netanyahu. Sorry, I'm having one of those moments. He instantly paused, said to Bibi to wait a minute, and then he kissed the very ground which he was standing on. Now, is there anything particularly? Yes, thank you, Pollard, Jonathan Pollard, and his wife. Is there anything particular holy about the tarmac of Ben Gurion? The answer is, of course not. Right? It may have a lot of holes in it, may be holy, but it's not holy. It's not particularly holy. It's not Jerusalem, and yet we know that every twist and turn, every step that we tread on the ground of Israel it has greater sanctity. That's the way the Almighty made the world. You look at a map, an old map, Jerusalem and Israel is at the center of the various continents and the world at large. No place in the history of mankind has been fought over and has so much blood been shed than over the land of Israel. Why? Why not other places in the Middle East? And the answer is because it's been recognized by all nations and by all faiths as the epicenter of the world, the place that connects heavens and earth, the place where Jacob lay down and had that epic dream and vision of the connection between the two worlds. Let us have a look. Good morning to everyone that are still joining us. So let us have a look at another point, and that is modern Zionism, okay? The modern state of Israel. Because as we mentioned before, it was a pipe dream for 2,000 years to be able to return to the land of Israel. Jews didn't have time really to dream or to have visions that we would one day return to the land of Israel, because they were persecuted. They were kicked from pillar to post. They just had to try to eke out a meager livelihood and hope that if they kept their heads down, kept working hard, they'd be able to get by and get on with life. And of course, as religious Jews, as Orthodox Jews, there was always that vision. It was a vision when we came to prayer 3 times a day. We pray wherever we are in the world towards Jerusalem. Our prayers speak about Israel, the land, and the rebuilding of the country. And then, of course, there is the when we speak about every festival. It all connects and relates in one way or another to Israel, okay, and to either to the journey to Israel or the redemption towards Israel. Everything is connected, really, in one way or another to the land of Israel. But that having been said, it was never seen, as something that would be a possibility in the lifetime of individuals. And although there were chalutzim going back the 18th century, 19th century, even the students of the Vilna Gaon made their way to Israel, and many great sages made their way, and there were always Jews living there. For the masses, Israel was not seen as a possible reality to live in. It was a swamp land. It was dangerous. It was treacherous. It wasn't a place to bring up a family. And yet we know that, quite miraculous, we know one of the hardest things is for the Jewish people or Jews to get along and to agree on anything. And yet when it came to Zionism, although there were differences, fundamental differences between the religious Zionists led by led by Rav Kook, and there were practical religious Zionists like Rabbi Reins, and then there were secularists, political Zionists like Herzl, and cultural Zionists such as Achad Ha'am and Berdichevsky, and so on. And yet, having said all of that, out of this clamorous discord between all of them, there was born this vision and dream for Zionism, for a return to the land of Israel. And of course, we know that despite the fact that the creation of the state of Israel was fraught with difficulty, it was the British, of course, who in 1917, through the Balfour Declaration, gave hope with a new mandate and the hope for the eventual Jewish national home, right? But there was intense opposition, as we're well aware, from the Arab world. And in fact, in an epic essay by the late Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the Rav, the head of Yeshiva University and Modern Orthodoxy, he wrote an essay about Kol Dodi Dofek, and in which he is able to elucidate it's an essay about the knocks, and he highlights some of the modern day miracles that occurred in the establishment of the state of Israel. Think about it. We're talking about after the Second World War, when there was communism against capitalism. America was on one side, and Russia and the Soviet Union was on the other. And they didn't agree on anything. And yet, when it came to voting on the Jewish state, they both stood together and voted in favor of the state of Israel. The fact that it was possible for Israel to even survive one day, as soon as it came into its existence, its very existence was thrown into jeopardy by the attack from all its neighbors. So the fact that it survived, the fact that it continued to thrive, the fact that it was able to build, oasis in the desert and so on, is each and every twist and turn of Israel's story is simply miraculous. And yet it has achieved incredible, wondrous things. And we should be, proud but feel connected. It is the land for the Jewish people, not the land for the Israelis. Although I have to say that whenever you get into a taxi, just as an aside, they all think that it's their land. In other words, that they should be the prime minister. Taxi drivers here may say hello to you at best. In Israel, in 2 minutes, when you get into a taxi, they've already spelled out their vision when they become prime minister and what needs to change in the state of Israel and what they would do differently. That's the way it was, and that's the way it always will be. That we are passionate about the land of Israel. And the Hebrew language also, the language of the Bible, was reborn through Ben Yehuda as a living tongue, right? And Jewish communities around the world, we only have to speak to Edwin Shuker, one of our own, who will tell us about Jewish communities around the world that have been threatened, and yet they have been rescued by Israel. Jews from Ethiopia, who had little contact with other Jews for centuries. Jews have come to Israel from over 100 countries. And that represents, as we say in our prayers, from the four corners of the earth, they're going to be gathered, that we are seeing a rebirth, and we are seeing the signs, the telltale signs of a beginning of the Messianic era and the redemption that's been promised and waited for so long. You only have to look at what's going on in the world. And the world of Torah scholarship also has been, that was decimated by the Holocaust, has been revived. And never have there been so many Jews studying the Word of God, studying Torah in Israel. Now, if you think about it, we're not going to get into the politics, but just think about it after the Holocaust. Hitler had a list of every single Rebbe, every single Jewish leader. He had a list. The Satmar Rebbe, the Belzer Rebbe, the Breslov Rebbe. He had a list, and he was determined to get hold and to torture and to kill the leaders, because he knew that without the Jewish leaders, without the Rebbes, Judaism would die. And he almost succeeded. With a couple of notable exceptions, we know the Sanzer Rebbe went to Netanya. He managed to, the Klausenberger Rebbe managed to escape and establish Laniado Hospital. We know that the who was it? The Belzer Rebbe, or the Belzer Rebbe's nephew, got out. I think the Satmar Rebbe got out. You can count them on one hand. And they were literally devastated, decimated. There was literally a hand. Sorry. You literally find a handful of students, and with that, they were able to rebuild and create a renaissance of Jewish learning that is thriving throughout the world today. And that in itself is, I think, the greatest, one of the great miracles of our people. It started, I know from my own family, Kristallnacht, 1938, Frankfurt, that's where my family were. Asking, you all know the history. Burning the books, smashing the shuls. Over 1,000 synagogues on one night were destroyed, burned to the ground. There's nothing that remains. The Irish historian Conor Cruise O'Brien once remarked that Jews who see themselves as unreligious are sometimes very religious indeed. And that was true of many of the founders of the State of Israel. Hess, Pinsker, Herzog, Chaim Weizmann, David Ben-Gurion, and many other heroes and pioneers of the return to Zion. So says Rabbi Sachs. They were not spiritual, nor did they observe many of the commandments, but the vision of the prophets and the covenant of the Jewish history flowed through their veins. God works through people. Sometimes, so the prophets taught, without their conscious knowledge and consent. It is difficult to reflect deeply on the birth and rebirth of Israel without us really sensing the touch of heaven in the minds of men and women, leading them to play their parts in a drama so much greater than any individual could have executed, even conceived. And there's many, many stories and encounters between, you should read the book, The Five Prime Ministers, of course, between the epic meeting between David Ben-Gurion and the Chazon Ish, one of the great religious leaders after the war. And even though the leaders were not religious, they had come out from the ashes of the Holocaust and had seen what Hitler had done to the Jewish people, to orthodoxy, to Jewish learning, to our heritage, and they were determined, and this is important, that the state of Israel, even though it would not be a religious state, it was going to be established as a Jewish state with Jewish values, with kosher food, with the Hebrew language, with an admiration and a respect for our heritage and our past. The basis of our tourism in Israel is because of the religious sites, is because of the recognition of the history and heritage that every single place has in Israel, from the Golan all the way down to the south of Israel. Let's move on, and I know we're late. You know what? We're late. We'll have to finish there for today. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of questions, as I like to do, from Rabbi Sachs. Okay. So question number one. Do you think that God has directed history through people who are not necessarily religious or are aware of their religious impact? Well, we've touched on that. Okay, let's just see if there's one more question. What does Rabbi Sachs mean when he says the secular Zionists had the touch of heaven in their minds? Okay, let's now carry on with the psalm. I apologize, we're 2 minutes late. We'll try and wrap things up. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Adonai Lamim Zacho Es Nishmois Le'abat Faivel Rav Yaakov Tzvi David Aryeh Tzvi Bas Mordechai Avram Ben Abbas Lavan Shlomo Tzvi Begel Bas Ruben Bar Shalom Ben Eli Ben Abbas Faivel from Shoshana Bas Yaakov Shmuel Kelebel Bas Henoch Yirmiyahu Yevan Vaishlias Sarah Marco Bas Ben Yomin Zalman Ben Rev Levine Bas John David Mordechai Ben Yaakov Baruch Fisher Aaron Ben Chaim Eliezer Goodman Rivka Bas Shimon King Yita Bas Chaim Heshko Aronovich Raizo Bas Chaim Eliyahu Sylvia Bas Yaakov Shangot Chava Bas Yaakov Conway Yehudas Miriam Bas Yeshua Zelek Be Moshe Be Ben Yehuda Eliezer Lewis Shar Kodil Mam Baganeda Temilu Chasam Lachim Elrachamim Yasrim Besesu Kanapolomim Yeshua Zechetish Wasabana in Lachasam Yanuchu B'Shalom Amishkavam Venomar Amen. Lastly, Refuah Shlema. Still, sadly, we've got people in hospital seriously ill, and therefore we have them along with everyone else in mind. Misha Berchavasein, Rabbi Mitzvah Yaakov, Moshe Aaron, David Shlomo, Yivarch, Vira Pesachilim, Babu Shana Mispalim, Babu Rambis, Chazakadosh Baruch Hu Yimale Rachum Lehem, Lachum Aleposam, Vishlach Lim, Pushlim and Shmaim Lachalabim Besoch, Shach Yisrael, Refuah Sanefesh Fusagov, Hajavagas Makarevan Amar, Amen. Wishing you all well. We'll see you at a burst of inspiration. 20 minutes tonight, 8:30. I think it's 8:30. Yeah, 8:30 to 8:50. Take care. Keep safe. Keep